In the morning, before we even feel the sunlight or hear the birds outside the window, many of us have already heard the noise inside our own minds. It is not a voice speaking in words, but a vague sense that something is about to happen, a shapeless worry that has no clear form, yet is enough to make the heart beat faster. The young look ahead and see the future like a road covered in fog. They are afraid of choosing the wrong major, afraid of unemployment, afraid of not being good enough, afraid of falling behind while others seem to succeed too early. Bright photos on social media quietly become mirrors reflecting their own insecurity. In what should be the most stable years of life, adults carry a different kind of fear. They no longer fear exams or grades, but they fear losing their jobs, fear their health declining, fear that one day their loved ones will no longer be beside them. Their fear is not loud. It is heavy, like a stone resting on the chest. When they have a family, responsibility makes every decision more serious. Even a small mistake can lead to great consequences, and that keeps them in a constant state of alertness. Even those who believe in God are not immune to fear. They read the Bible, they attend Mass, they pray, and yet there are long nights when they lie awake wondering why God seems silent. Some prayers appear unanswered, tears fall while the heavens remain still. That silence can feel more frightening than adversity itself, because it leads a person to question their own faith. Fear is not a sign of weakness. It is a natural response built into the human nervous system to protect life. When our ancestors faced wild animals, fear made them run faster, react stronger, survive longer. Our bodies still carry that mechanism. A racing heart, sweaty palms, quickened breath, all of it is the body's way of saying it is trying to protect us. Anxiety is not the same as a lack of faith. Many people blame themselves when they feel uneasy, thinking that if their faith was strong enough, they would no longer be afraid. But faith does not erase our biological structure. It does not turn us into creatures without emotion. In fact, it is precisely because we have emotions that faith has meaning. To believe when there is no fear is easy. To believe while trembling is what is hard. The issue is not whether we are afraid, but how much space fear occupies in the mind. When it passes briefly, it makes us more cautious. But when it stays, when it becomes a familiar voice every day, it begins to shape the way we see the world. Every opportunity becomes a risk. Every change becomes a threat. Every delay becomes a sign of failure. Some people no longer make decisions based on dreams or values, but on what they fear most. They choose a job not because they love it, but because they fear lacking money. They remain in an unhealthy relationship because they fear loneliness. They stay silent when they should speak because they fear being judged. Fear, once just an emotion, becomes a dwelling place, a wall surrounding their lives. The modern world only makes fear more subtle. Negative news spreads quickly. Predictions of economic crisis, war, and disease appear every day. People are surrounded by information that rarely allows the nervous system to rest. We do not only fear the present, we fear things that might happen in a distant future. Faith in that context is often tested quietly. People still go to church, still recite familiar prayers, but inside they are full of questions. Why does nothing change? Why do the difficulties continue? The tension between promise and reality exhausts the soul, and when the soul is tired, fear easily slips into the empty spaces. At times, prayer no longer flows from love or gratitude, but from panic. Words come quickly, requests pile up, as if trying to persuade God to act immediately. Deep down, it is the cry of a heart afraid of being abandoned. In those moments, people do not hate God. They are simply afraid of being alone. When fear becomes the environment we live in, it distorts the way we see ourselves. We begin to believe we are not good enough, not strong enough, not worthy enough. Small mistakes are magnified into proof of total failure. The mind becomes a courtroom where we are both the accused and the harsh judge. In such circumstances, admitting that we are afraid is already an act of courage. Many people try to hide their anxiety behind a strong appearance, behind forced positive words. But fear does not disappear when it is denied. It simply finds another way to surface. Sometimes it becomes a headache, sometimes insomnia, sometimes irritation toward the very people we love. One day, we realize we no longer remember what peace feels like. Everything is weighed through the lens of risk. Every decision comes with a worst-case scenario. The caution that once aimed to protect us now imprisons us. Life turns into a chain of defensive reactions instead of a journey of trust and discovery. The truth is that fear will always exist in a world filled with uncertainty, but when it becomes the center, it steals our ability to love freely and to walk courageously. We were created with a nervous system that knows how to fear in order to survive, but we were not created to live forever in a state of alarm. When the heart is constantly tense, the soul slowly dries up. And it is at that point of exhaustion that the question of faith becomes deeper than ever. Is it possible to live amid uncertainty without letting it control an entire life? Is it possible to pray not only out of panic, but out of a longing to be close to God? When fear is no longer just a passing emotion, but becomes the place we live, the journey beyond it does not begin by denying it, but by facing it honestly and admitting that we need a foundation greater than the anxieties that surround us. Among the sacred pages that millions of people read each day, there is no promise that those who believe in God will never be afraid. The Bible does not paint a rosy picture where every believer stands strong without wavering. On the contrary, it is filled with sighs, with cries for help, with dark nights of the soul. And that is what makes faith more real, more intimate, closer to the anxious heartbeat of people today. When we open the ancient poems of the Book of Psalms, we do not find pretend peace. We find a trembling person, surrounded by enemies, overwhelmed by doubt, drowning in the feeling of being abandoned. Words like, "When I am afraid, I still trust in you," were not written from a place of comfort. They were written in the middle of a storm. That shows us that fear was not hidden. It was brought directly into conversation with God. Many people think that to be considered faithful, they must always smile and say that everything is fine. But the Bible does not require us to deny our emotions. It does not teach us to lie to our own hearts. The writers of the Psalms wept. They questioned. They asked, "Why are you silent?" They did not lose their faith by asking. They were using their faith to ask. The difference lies in where fear is placed. When fear sits on the throne, it commands every thought and action. But when fear is placed under the light of God, it becomes part of the story, not the center of the story. The Bible does not eliminate fear. It puts fear in its proper place, not as a master, but simply as an emotion. Denial and trust can look similar on the surface, but they are completely different at the core. Denial tries to silence anxiety by pretending it does not exist. Trust acknowledges that voice, but refuses to let it have the final word. Denial is built on the fear of appearing weak. Trust is built on the truth that God is greater than that weakness. Some people pray with a strong, confident tone, just to calm themselves. They repeat positive phrases like a wall of protection, but deep inside, they are still avoiding their worries. Real faith does not need to hide. It is steady enough to say, "I am afraid," and then to add, "But I still choose to trust." Peace sometimes comes, but it does not always arrive immediately. If faith only exists when we feel comfortable, it will be fragile. Faith is not an emotional state, it is a decision. That decision is not based on our heartbeat or our level of anxiety, but on the nature of God as revealed in Scripture. The Psalms often repeat an inner movement from lament to hope. The one who prays begins with tears, then slowly remembers what God has done in the past. They remind themselves of His faithfulness, of the times they were delivered. Not because circumstances change right away, but because the memory of God's faithfulness becomes a foundation stronger than present emotions. Putting fear in its proper place means not allowing it to define our identity. Fear may say, "Everything is about to fall apart," but the truth of God says, "I am still here." When those two voices face each other, faith does not completely silence fear, but it chooses to stand with the more enduring truth. Modern people are used to instant solutions. When anxiety appears, we want it gone immediately. But the Bible shows a different path, bringing anxiety into relationship with God. Instead of running away, we carry it into prayer. Instead of suppressing it, we speak it out loud. That very act is already an expression of trust. Many figures in the Bible walked in fear and yet remained faithful. They were not emotionless heroes, but deeply human people. What set them apart was not the level of their calm, but the direction of their gaze. They looked beyond their fear, toward the one they trusted. When we understand this, we stop condemning ourselves for feeling uneasy. Anxiety does not automatically distance us from God. What matters is our posture toward it. If we let it pull us away from faith, it becomes chains. If we bring it before the Lord, it becomes an opportunity for faith to grow. Words like, "When I am afraid, I still trust in you," are not empty slogans. They are declarations spoken in the middle of real trembling. Faith here does not erase the trembling. It exists at the same time as the trembling. Both realities can live side by side in one heart. Putting fear in its proper place also means not glorifying it. It is not the voice of destiny. It is not a certain prophecy about the future. It is simply the reaction of a limited human being facing the unknown. When we see it in the light of God, we realize it is not as powerful as we once thought. So faith is not walking through darkness with our eyes closed, nor is it convincing ourselves that the darkness does not exist. Faith is opening our eyes in the darkness and continuing to walk because we know who is leading the way. When the Bible places fear in its proper place, it frees us from the pressure to become numb and invites us to be courageous in a deeper way, courageous enough to believe even while the heart is still trembling. Amid all the familiar images of a being full of power and light, there is still a moment that feels very different, very dark, very human. Jesus did not only walk on water or teach before the crowds. He also stepped into ours when his heart felt as heavy as any of ours. That night held no miracles, no cheers, only darkness and a thick, pressing silence. The garden called the Mount of Olives became the place where human history touched its deepest fear. Not in a noisy square, but in that quiet space, an intense inner battle unfolded. The disciples slept, while he remained awake in a loneliness no one else could fully share. The Gospel records that he was sorrowful even to death. That is not an exaggeration. It is the truth of a soul bearing the crushing weight of what was about to come. His human heart clearly felt the betrayal, the torture, the humiliation, the death. No emotional numbness shielded him from any of it. Sweat like drops of blood was not a dramatic detail meant to impress, but evidence of extreme anguish. The body reacts to overwhelming fear. This makes the story feel closer, not distant. He did not stand outside the human experience. He walked straight into it. The prayer, "If it is possible, let this cup pass from me," did not rise from a cold and distant deity, but from a man who truly knew fear. Those words surprise many people because they reveal an inner struggle. Yet right there, we see the depth of the mystery of the Incarnation. God did not pretend to be human. He truly took on human limits and human emotions. The thought that even Jesus felt the weight of fear is deeply striking. Even Jesus felt the weight of fear. That sentence does not diminish his authority. It makes his love even greater. He did not save humanity from a safe distance, but from the very center of suffering. Fear in that moment did not weaken him. It revealed the truth of his humanity. Weakness does not lie in feeling emotion, but in allowing emotion to decide everything. And at Gethsemane, what ultimately decided was not fear, but obedience. After asking for the cup to be taken away, another sentence followed, "Yet not my will, but yours be done." That is not the voice of someone who no longer feels afraid, but of someone who is afraid and still chooses to trust. The space between those two sentences is where faith reaches its climax. In that garden, fear did not disappear in some miraculous way. No angel erased the pain completely. The road to the cross still lay ahead. But what changed was the direction of the heart. He carried fear into obedience, instead of letting it pull him into escape. This speaks deeply to each of us. We often think that to obey God, we must first feel completely at peace. But the image of Gethsemane shows that true obedience can walk side by side with trembling. Courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is moving forward while fear is still there. When we look at Jesus in that dark night, we no longer need to feel ashamed of our own panic. He understands the racing heart, the desire to avoid suffering. That makes our prayers more honest, because we know we are speaking to one who has stood in a similar place. That image also breaks the idea that faith means outward strength. His true strength was not displayed when crowds applauded, but when he knelt alone in the night. The greatest power was not in removing suffering, but in remaining faithful within it. In a world that celebrates victory and success, Gethsemane is a paradox. There is no halo of glory there, only tears and sweat. And yet, in the place that seemed weakest, the plan of salvation was confirmed. Fear did not destroy the mission. It became the setting where love was proven. When facing our own anxiety, we can remember that the Son of God once trembled too, not so that we would remain in fear, but so that we would know we are not alone in it. If he carried fear into obedience, we can carry our fear into prayer. And at that emotional peak, a gentle truth appears. God does not stand far away, observing human fear. He steps into it, feels it, and transforms it into a path toward new life. When we look at Jesus in the Garden of Olives, we do not only see one who suffers, we see one who understands our fear more than we realize, and still chooses to love to the very end. The phrase, "God is bigger than your anxiety," can easily be misunderstood if it is heard only as an inspirational slogan. Many people expect that once their faith is strong enough, every wave of anxiety will immediately disappear. Sleepless nights will come to an end, and negative thoughts will never return. But real life shows that this is not always the case. There are people who deeply love God and still struggle with their own minds every single day. God being bigger than your anxiety does not mean He makes your nervous system stop reacting. Your heart may still race when you receive bad news. Your stomach may still tighten before an important decision. The human body was created with natural biological mechanisms, and faith does not erase that structure. If faith only worked when your physiology was completely calm, it would be fragile. The difference lies deeper than emotion. When the voice in your head keeps repeating worst-case scenarios, it can sound very convincing. It tells you that you will fail, that you will be abandoned, that you will not make it through. But the truth of God does not change according to those sounds. That truth is not defined by fear, but by His faithful nature. Fear usually speaks with urgency. It creates the feeling that everything is collapsing right now. It paints the future as a dark picture with no way out. Faith, on the other hand, speaks more slowly. It does not deny that the worst could happen, but it asks a different question. Even if it does, will God disappear? Christian faith does not promise a life without trials. It promises presence, and that presence has power beyond every scenario the human imagination can create. When you think everything is over, His plan is still unfolding at levels you cannot yet see. This is not blind self-comfort, but trust grounded in the history of salvation. Psychology shows that the brain naturally leans toward negative possibilities in order to protect us from danger. That explains why we often believe the worst more easily than we hope for the best. When faith enters the picture, it does not remove that mechanism. It offers a different frame of reference. It reminds us that not every alarm signal is a certain prophecy. God's presence is stronger than your nervous reaction in a quiet way. He does not need to make you feel instantly comfortable to prove His power. Sometimes His power is revealed in the fact that you are still standing, even while your heart trembles. That steadiness does not come from inner strength alone, but from the awareness that you are not alone. When fear says, "The worst will happen," it wants you to believe the future has already been decided in a negative direction. It narrows your vision to a single outcome. Faith widens that vision. It says that the future is not entirely in the hands of random events, but in the hands of one who knows exactly what He is doing. Even if the worst truly happens, the story does not end there. Many people in the Bible experienced loss, exile, sickness, betrayal, yet God's presence did not leave them. This does not make suffering pleasant, but it means suffering is not the final voice. Faith is not a constant feeling of peace. There are days when you feel strong and days when you feel exhausted. The decision to trust does not depend entirely on your emotional state. It is like anchoring a ship in the middle of a storm. The waves still crash, the wind still blows, but the anchor keeps the ship from drifting aimlessly. When you understand that God is bigger than your anxiety, you begin to distinguish between thoughts and truth. Not everything that appears in your mind reflects reality. Fear can create very convincing stories, but it does not have the authority to define your worth or the outcome of your life. Trusting His plan does not mean you understand every step. Often, you see only a small part of the whole picture, but not seeing the whole does not mean there is no whole. His plan reaches far beyond limited human imagination, and that is what brings hope when the present feels unclear. At a theological level, saying that God is bigger than your anxiety is a statement about who He is. He is not limited by time, by human mistakes, or by unfavorable circumstances. At a psychological level, this creates an inner foundation of safety. When you know there is a reality greater than your fear, you are no longer forced to handle everything by your own strength. On long, sleepless nights, anxiety may still whisper, but you can choose to let another whisper rise alongside it. God is still here. Those two voices may exist at the same time, yet you are no longer completely ruled by only one of them. This choice does not remove emotion, but it directs it. In the end, God is bigger than your anxiety, not because He instantly removes every problem, but because He places every problem within a larger context. In that context, failure is not the final definition, loss is not the end, and fear is not the throne. When this truth sinks deep into your mind, you may still tremble, but you are no longer in despair, because you know you are being held within a reality greater than your own fear. Peace does not always arrive right after you hear a sermon or read an inspiring verse of Scripture. There are days when you understand everything about faith, yet your heart still races and your mind keeps spinning through worst-case scenarios. It is in that very real place that the practice of faith begins. Not at the peak of emotion, but in the middle of unresolved, tangled thoughts. Practicing faith while anxiety is still present means you stop pretending to be strong before God. Many people are used to praying with beautiful words that do not truly reflect what is happening inside. They say they are fine, when in reality they are exhausted. Honesty with God does not disappoint Him. He does not need a polished version of you. He wants the real you, with all your trembling and confusion. When you say, "I am afraid," that is not a failure of faith. It is the starting point of mature faith. Truth spoken out loud creates space for grace. Instead of suppressing your questions, you place them before God. Instead of hiding your weakness, you allow it to be seen. And in that light, fear begins to lose part of its power. Praying while trembling may sound contradictory, but it is a very real experience. You may kneel down while your mind is still chaotic. You may speak your request while tears are still falling. Faith does not demand that you be completely calm before you enter into prayer. It simply invites you to come, even while your heart is still unsettled. Anxiety often mixes truth with assumption. A small event can be magnified by the mind into a catastrophe, so practicing faith also means learning to separate thoughts from facts. Not every thought that appears in your mind is trustworthy. Some thoughts are only reactions of fear, not objective reality. When a negative thought arises, you can pause and ask yourself, is this an absolute truth or just a prediction? That small act creates distance between you and your fear. That distance is enough for you to choose a different response. Faith operates in that small space, where you decide not to believe every voice echoing in your mind. Reminding yourself, "I am not fighting alone," is not positive self-hypnosis. It is a declaration rooted in the belief that God is present, even when you do not feel Him clearly. The feeling of loneliness can be very strong, but feelings do not always reflect reality. His presence does not depend on the intensity of your emotions. There will be days when you have to repeat this many times. Anxiety does not disappear because of one prayer. It may return in the afternoon, at midnight, or early in the morning. But each time you choose to believe that you are not alone, you are building a new inner habit. Over time, that habit slowly changes the way you live in the midst of uncertainty. Faith is not climbing above the waves to stand on perfectly calm water. Life rarely gives you a sea that remains flat forever. The waves can still be high, the wind can still be strong. But faith is knowing that there is a hand holding you in the waves. You may not see that hand, but you know you have not sunk. That image does not deny the reality of the storm. It acknowledges that the water can be cold, that the body can grow tired, but it adds another dimension. You are not abandoned. The difference between despair and hope sometimes lies simply in the awareness that someone is with you in that moment. Practicing faith can also be very concrete and simple. Spend a few minutes each day slowing your breathing and reminding yourself of one truth about God. Write down the things that frighten you and bring them into prayer. Share your burden with a trusted friend. These small steps are not loud, but over time they form a solid foundation. Not every day is a great victory. There are days when you simply do not give up. You still pray, even when you feel nothing special. You still go to church, even when your mind is distracted. You still choose kindness, even when your heart feels heavy. Those quiet actions are faith at work. Anxiety may make you think you are moving backward because you still feel uneasy. But progress in the spiritual life is not measured by how many times you no longer feel afraid. It is measured by how many times you still choose to trust in the middle of fear. Each time you do, you are teaching your heart a new truth. Maybe today you are still anxious. Maybe your heartbeat has not fully slowed. Maybe your questions still do not have clear answers. That does not make you a person of weak faith. It simply shows that you are human, living in a world full of uncertainty. If God is greater than your fear, then fear no longer has the final word. It may speak loudly, but it does not determine your destiny. You may walk slowly, sometimes trembling, but not in despair. And on that journey, each small step of trust, even fragile, is still enough to keep you afloat in the waves of life.